Welcome to Science or Fiction, a podcast by sci-fi author Michael James Scharen. In this program, we'll be discussing science, fiction, and the often blurred spaces between the two. Here we try to dispel common scientific misconceptions by both Hollywood and the media, even that which is meant to be educational. My background includes a Bachelor of Science and Master of Arts in Physics, with experience in both R&D and production. I hope you enjoy these podcasts, and if there are comments or input, please direct them via the contact page for my website, michaelsbookcorner.com. We've been warned about impending oil shortages since the first barrel was sucked out of the ground in Pennsylvania in 1859. The term peak oil was first used in the 1860s. After that first well was sunk. Much of the oil harvested then was surface mined, that is, it was almost literally a scoop from the surface. Having lived in Santa Barbara for several years, I have seen firsthand the tar bubbling up through the sand on the beach near the university. Such was the case around the Dead Sea, where bitumen was harvested to be used for caulking boats and other purposes. As we've been using relatively cheap hydrocarbons for over 170 years, we see that each time the peak oil cry comes up, yet another large oil and or gas field is found. Since 1892, crude oil and its derivatives have been called fossil fuels. The story goes that John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil, paid shills to lobby the attendees of this conference and to determine by vote that crude oil was the result of the decay of ancient plant material. This has much in common with the climate change debacle. But science is not determined by vote, only by facts and evidence. Given Rockefeller's habit of stealing patents, sabotaging pipelines, and co-opting the railroads, such tactics for creating false scarcity for his product have a ring of truth. Remember that by 1892, electricity was well on its way to replacing Standard Oil's primary product, kerosene. The automobile was still in its infancy. Crude oil is a large soup of hydrocarbons with some other elements sprinkled in. Some oil may in fact result from the process described, but where is the proof? Consensus from scientists is not evidence of anything, and the definitions may be quite subjective. Pluto's demotion from planet status was based upon a similar vote with equally vague definitions. The requirement by which Pluto is demoted was a criteria that a planetary body must have cleared its orbit of other debris. If this is the case, then Earth is not a planet, nor is Jupiter, as they both have co-orbital asteroids. Those who question the fossil fuel definition are considered fringe conspiracy theorists. In fact, they may not even disagree completely with the sanctified process, but simply offer alternative explanations for hydrocarbon formation within the planet. Alternatives to the decaying plant conjecture are natural, geologic, or abiotic processes. One observation used to support abiotic oil is the fact that many closed wells do refill to some extent. This is a weak argument, as previous oil harvesting techniques may simply have been not very efficient in extraction from the surrounding rock. The source of oil well's seepage may be the result of abiotic processes, but much more evidence is required. The theory was developed in the Soviet Union during the Cold War, as the Union needed to be energy self-sufficient. But the science behind the theory is sound and is based on experimental evidence in both the laboratory and in the field. This theory has helped to identify and therefore develop large numbers of gas and oil deposits. Examples of such fields are the South Kilichiu field and the controversial Sakhalin-2 field. The more recent work of Vladimir Kucherov, Anton Kolesnikov, and Alexander Goncharov's research was published in the scientific journal Nature Geoscience. Experiments have shown that under extreme conditions of heat and pressure, it is possible to convert iron oxide, calcium carbonate, and water into methane, with hydrocarbons containing up to 10 carbon atoms being produced by Russian scientists last century and confirmed in recent U.S. experiments. The absence of large quantities of free gaseous oxygen in the magma prevents the hydrocarbons from burning and therefore forming the lower energy state molecule carbon dioxide. The conditions present in the Earth's mantle would easily be sufficient for these small hydrocarbon chains to polymerize into the longer chain molecules found in crude oil. One alternative process, known as serpentinization, which is a metamorphic process where the mantle rock olivine is exposed to different temperatures and pressures than its origin, undergoing a metamorphic transformation that creates an exothermic reaction, as well as producing higher hydrocarbons, i.e. oil, as well as methane. It is not known how lighter elements, such as carbon and hydrogen, could sink to the depths where oil is found. Reported in Science Daily, researchers at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm have managed to prove that fossils from animals and plants are not necessary for crude oil and natural gas to be generated. New prospecting criteria will make it much easier to find these sources of energy. It is likely that they could be found all over the globe. 61% of the world's energy consumption derives from crude oil and natural gas. It is the most convenient and powerful fuel source we have, and is not going away. Electric vehicles are not going to be powered by solar and wind. This happens only in the land of rainbows and unicorns. Oil comprises 85% carbon, 13% hydrogen, and 0.5% oxygen, with traces of sulfur and nitrogen. As described, chemists tell us it originated from deep composition of organic matter, layers formed from the remains of dead animals or plants. Hence the name fossil fuel. So by definition, its source was limited. Most chemists are not biologists, nor are they geologists or physicists. Their 130-year-old vote means very little. That theory was plausible when oil wells were drilled into the fossil layers of the Earth's crust. But if oil comes from basement rock, miles and miles underground, is well below the fossil layer. Despite conventional wisdom around fossil fuels, the argument for non-biologically produced oil was not a new one. In 1951, the Russian scientist N.A. Kudryavtsev announced a theory that deep petroleum was produced abiotically. His theories were consolidated with the exploration of the oil fields of the Dnieper Donets in early 1990s. World-renowned geologist C. Warren Hunt's anhydride theory of 1996 asserted the idea of biogenesis from living microbial forms as opposed to fossilized forms. Here's a timeline supporting abiotic oil. 2002, world's biggest oil reserves discovered. The Athabasca oil sands deposit in northeastern Alberta, Canada, is found to be the largest source of petroleum in the world. Beneath Alberta's tar sands, at a depth of 7,200 feet, is the world's largest hydrocarbon deposit. Estimates believe the field to hold 1.7 trillion barrels of oil. 2003, scientists working at the Gas Resources Corporation in Houston mimic conditions more than 100 kilometers below the Earth's surface by heating marble, iron oxide, and water to around 1,500 degrees C and to 50,000 times atmospheric pressure. The theory withstands tests put to it and settles many previously unsolved problems in petroleum science. The white tiger fields off the coast of Vietnam, discovered in the 1970s, become the center of scientific attention as exploration companies drill for oil a mile into solid granite, deeper than ever before, and way below the known fossil deposits. They start producing 338,000 barrels of oil per day. These new non-fossil fields are estimated to hold a further 600 million barrels. 2005, new tests prove validity of non-fossil claims. Extensive geological investigations by Shell and British Petroleum and presented at a scientific symposium in New York confirm that the source of newfound oil reserves is not fossil. U.S. oil production plummets sharply as the effect of lower prices turns into economic reality. 2006, Russian oil price wobbles. This has been a bad year for oil. Not only have the theories of vast untapped reserves of oil been proven to be true, but Russian and Canadian producers have taken the unwritten laws of OPEC into their own hands by cutting the effective market price of oil to around US $15 a barrel in an attempt to take an early competitive position against the anticipated future price of oil. They have established themselves as the supplier of choice for European business and alienated the OPEC cartel. The U.S. is torn between traditional loyalties to Saudi Arabia and, by implication, OPEC, or their European business allies. OPEC holds their new U.S. $25 price level, but demand for OPEC oil is dwindling as Canadian reserves start to open up. 2008, political turbulence in Saudi Arabia. As oil prices fell, Saudi Arabia's mass immigrant population has been encouraged to return to the Indian subcontinent as Saudis clamor for jobs. Young Saudis, poorer than ever and with little chance of employment, would seek alliances with extreme radical movements. The Norwegian economy, almost 50% of it still dependent on oil-related industries, declares itself to be heading for bankruptcy. 2010, Mideast terrorism spreads worldwide. Internal terrorism sweeps the Middle East as oil economies falter, creating substantial economic, political, and social instability in the whole region. American embassies are shut down as America switches completely to Canadian and Russian oil. 2013, UN intervenes to create oil price stability. The airline industry loses half its passengers in just 12 months. International tourism implodes. Amidst desperate negotiations to stall seemingly uncontrollable terrorism, the UN passes a resolution calling for a US $15 minimum oil price, targeted to bring balance to the world economic system. The resolution is passed with few abstentions. 2015, world settles into energy glut. Motor vehicles alone make up more than 50% of oil consumption in 2000. Now that has declined to 25%. Access to massive reservoirs of hydrogen in the Earth's crust has given fuel cell technology an unexpected boost over the past few years. With a new fixed oil price, governments step in to support fuel cell industries and prevent future oil blackmail. And very recently, the United States experienced complete energy independence. Only the shutting down of drilling and pipelines has caused the prices to skyrocket, as this is the simple law of supply and demand. Taking another look from the 10,000-foot level, we have to examine the situation rationally. We must get past the hubris of believing human beings have the power and capability in just over a century to drain the entire planet of crude oil. That argument has obviously failed. We're still rather insignificant with respect to the Earth in the 4.6 billion years she's here before we arrived on the scene. Hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon are among the most common elements in the universe, with hydrogen taking the lead. Water is one of the most common molecules. The planet is quite old by our standards, but in forming, we know Earth is composed of a multitude of elements and compounds, and the lightest ones have not all made it to the surface. Very recently, studies have put forward the idea that vast amounts of fresh or lightly brackish water is locked up in the upper mantle. Estimates put this at a volume of 1 or more times that of our surface oceans. Hydrocarbons are common in the outer solar system, with Titan having seas of liquid methane and ethane at the surface. Those who invent terms like fossil fuels or climate change only want to lay a guilt trip on you and persuade you that humans are destroying the planet. In fact, the planet is getting greener, just as it did in the medieval warming period. I seriously doubt the Vikings were ruining the earth with their Saab SUVs at that time. It is not the hubris of those going about their daily lives, driving their cars and running their power plants we need to worry about. It is the people who wish to shame you, either because they seek to control you or are the dupes of the real shot callers. This is how cults work. Peak oil and climate change are cults, and so the age-old tactics are still in play.